Hello everyone! My name is Konstantin Grotov. I'm a bachelor student at Mo University and intern researcher at JetBrains. Today I'm going to briefly tell you about our work called a large-scale comparison of Python code in Jupyter notebooks and scripts. Recently, studying Jupyter notebooks became more relevant and popular. Some key studies about them are presented on this slide. It's probably not a secret for people who work with Jupyter notebooks or any other computational notebooks that there are intuitive differences between them and traditional scripts. We wanted to provide facts for these obvious feelings and understand whether there are structural differences of code in notebooks and scripts. Also, we wanted to analyze the stylistic quality of notebooks and compare it with scripts. First of all, in our study, we selected metrics to analyze structural and stylistic properties of notebooks. One of the challenges is that we needed such metrics that are applicable not only for notebook cells, but aggregated for internal notebooks as well, to compare them with scripts. For structural metrics, we defined three categories: code writing metrics, for example source lines of code, function usage metrics, for example the count of user-defined functions, and complexity metrics, for example cyclomatic code complexity. In total, we chose 13 metrics from the work Carlo and colleagues that we believe are meaningful for notebooks and scripts, and added 2 metrics of our own which take into account the structure of notebooks, namely count of comments included in markdown cells and coupling between cells. As for stylistic metrics, we also divided them into 3 groups: code style issues, error-prone issues, and best practices issues. To determine these issues, we used 3 different style guides presented on the slide. Our overall goal is to collect structural and stylistic metrics for both notebooks and scripts. To collect structural metrics, we have developed our own library called Matroskin, which quickly converts a dataset of notebooks or scripts into a relational database containing structural metrics values for individual cells and entire notebooks. To collect stylistic metrics, we use the Hyperstat tool developed by Beryl and colleagues, which allows to run several linters on the code and obtain a data frame of all existing stylistic issues in the code. Combining this data makes up our comparison and analysis. For our analysis, we collected a dataset of Python Jupyter notebooks that we present to the research community for further usage. The dataset consists of all permissively licensed Jupyter notebooks collected from GitHub as of November 2020, more than 800,000 notebooks. For structural analysis, we took all the Jupyter notebooks and also collected a dataset of all permissively licensed Python scripts from 10,000 most started Python projects on GitHub. Additionally, for scripts, we excluded files with names init and setup. This resulted in a total of more than 450,000 scripts. Now, for the results of the analysis. The first group of structural metrics is code writing metrics. These metrics show that notebooks are larger. They contain on average more code than scripts and more additional information in the form of markdown cells. This leads us to the conclusion that tools aimed at keeping the code clean and organized are even more crucial for notebooks. With the increase of the source file size, the probability of an error is also increasing. The next group is function usage metrics. The patterns of function usage significantly differ between the notebooks and the scripts. The most notable results is the difference between the usage of user-defined functions. Notebooks tend to have fewer unique user-defined functions, but use them more frequently. Other results point the way to a lot of potential for the research. It seems that notebooks users define functions for specific reasons, and the practices of the API methods usage are very distinct from notebooks. These results show that library management and import analysis could be promising direction for the developers of tools for notebooks. It's difficult to describe the results of the complexity metrics in full within the limits of this presentation, but notebooks contain on average less complex code, as evidenced by cyclomatic complexity. However, the relationship of structural elements in notebooks is more complicated than in scripts, so the code in them is more entangled. From our structural results, we can conclude that there is a significant difference in notebooks and scripts. Having a lower number of user-defined functions and directly imported ones, we can suppose that notebooks are used more for employing Python modules, importing them fully, and then orchestrating their methods. Despite the fact that notebook's code is less complex, it can be more entangled and thus harder to comprehend. This should be taken into account when developing tools for notebooks. Developing tools that could help notebook users to untangle their code seems like a prominent implication of our results. Let's move on to statistics. For the statistic analysis, because of its computational intensity, we sampled 100,000 files from the previously described datasets. As a result of the statistic analysis, we selected the top 5 most common errors for each group using a weighted average. For each of groups, our results show that notebooks contain more of all the top issues. However, not all of these issues are actually valid. Some of them are just not applicable for notebooks. For example, the error found statement that has no effect frequently constitutes outputting something in a notebook, which is its main goal. Another batch of issues is very likely caused by the practices of development in notebooks. Iterative development causes some parts of code to become obsolete much faster, or leads to input being declared all over the file. Overall, our results show that notebooks require their own linters, or at least the updated versions of the existing ones, that take into account their specific usage. In our future work, we want to try and understand causes of these structural and stylistic differences. Perhaps these differences are due to the fact that development in notebooks is less collaborative than in scripts, and therefore they are more individual and less verified by other developers. Also, it's very interesting to analyze how the nonlinear structure of a notebook affects its structural differences. Finally, it's possible that Jupyter IDEs simply lack the necessary tools, unlike traditional modern IDEs, and that's why the development in notebooks is simply less convenient on average than for scripts. Thank you very much for your attention. On this slide you can find the links to the developer library, the dataset, and the preprint of our paper.